It's 4 o'clock on a Thursday, and it's time for the Taxi Quarantini Happy Hour. Are you guys seeing me now? Oh, so you did have me. I thought that I wasn't up. All right, yeah. I thought that you guys weren't seeing me because you were making comments sounded like you weren't getting me. Anyway, here we are. I'm back. I guess we'll have to edit that front off. Anyway, so did you hear me talking about Bohemian Rhapsody? No, okay, but interesting. Some people are saying I was there and I stopped. Other people are saying that I'm not. Whatever. Anyway, okay, welcome to the show. All right, I just checked all the settings. That was weird. Once again, the settings were all correct. I hit go and it didn't. All right, so I said hello to everybody, which now I'm going to do a group hello in the, to save a little time. So hello. So somebody was kind enough to send me the multi-track of Bohemian Rhapsody, which I am now absolutely certain after spending like, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes going track by track on it before to see where things were. Excuse me. The most complex track layout of anything I've ever seen in my lifetime. Because there are so many vocal tracks. I think this was recorded in 74, 75. Roy Thomas Baker, I believe, was the producer. And if memory serves, I think Mike Stone was the engineer on it. Could be wrong about that. Maybe Roy Thomas Baker engineered it himself, but I think Mike Stone engineered it. Anyway, Roy Thomas Baker loved multiple layers of vocals, as he did with the Cars years later. But I believe that Freddie Mercury really kind of produced this song, is my recollection, that it was much more him in this case than Roy Thomas Baker. And it's just got, many tracks of gang vocals, group background vocals. And so what we would do back in the day, because we only had 24 tracks, we didn't have unlimited tracks like you kids today have in your DAWs. So we would have to, on a song like Bohemian Rhapsody, you would record, let's say, 4 people singing around a microphone. And then you would take another track and do another pass with the same or other 4 people singing a similar part in the same section of the song. Get a good performance on that. And once you had it, then you would do a little premix and dump those 2 tracks of, let's say, a combined 8 vocals down to 1 track. And then you would go repeat the process again. And in their case, they just kept doing that until they had like 100 or 200 vocals on there. So they ate up a lot of tracks. The track has, I think, it's just got like kick, snare, tom-toms, and room mic, if I remember correctly. The drums didn't actually sound that good. I think it has 3 bass tracks on it, and they all sound different from each other. So I'm sure that one was direct, one was an amp, and I don't know, maybe the other one was a third pass with a different bass guitar. There's a nice stereo piano in there, which we all know that part and love it. Anyway, back in my day, what we would do, and then they have stuff like all of a sudden a lead guitar will pop up on a background vocal track, or a piano part will pop up on a vocal track, because they had to put it somewhere. And if the vocals weren't performing in that section of the song, they would use that empty space on that track between, when the background vocals ended and before they start again, they would drop in other instruments. Well, of course, Nowadays, you can simply automate that stuff. You could change your pan, you could change your levels, you could change the settings on your compressor, on your reverb, on delays, and all that stuff would be remembered in automation. We didn't have that luxury. So what we would do would be mix the entire song and just mute the background vocal tracks when that guitar part was there or when that piano part was there, because we had to change the settings. So those instruments, even if we left the tracks open during that section, they would have been irrelevant to the mix. So we get the whole thing mixed, and then, or just mix up to the section where the lead guitar part was, and then do the lead guitar part stuff. Mix that section with the lead guitar. Maybe change the pan, add a delay, add some compression, add some reverb, change the EQ. All those things were possibilities. And then just print that to 1/4 inch and then edit that into the 1/4 inch of the entire mix that we had before with the irrelevant guitar part in there, if you catch my drift. So it was a pretty easy way. It wasn't that hard to do. You had to think about it and make sure that you were good at editing, which most of us were back then with razor blades and tape. Anyway, nowadays you could just take those parts and dump them off to their own empty track. So you could take that solo that's buried in the middle of a background vocal part. The solo doesn't happen at the same time as the vocal. So you could just take that solo and move it from track 21 to track 45. You could take any of those parts and move them to fresh virginal tracks. And that way you wouldn't even have to worry about so much automation stuff where, you would mix a certain section with the automation, having the background vocals be panned far left and right, let's say. And then for the guitar solo, you would pan it straight up the middle in all likelihood. But the automation would remember that. So if you split the tracks out and take them to new tracks, then you don't have to worry about that stuff. Anyway, I can't wait to drive myself crazy trying to remix it. When I first got it today, I just shoved all the tracks up and just let it roll. It actually sounded pretty good. But when you isolate the drums, you go, I know what drums sounded like in world-class studios in 1975 because I was working in a world-class studio in 1975. And I've got to say, I'm sure they had an A-list team of people working on their stuff. And the drums sound good in context, which is really all that matters in the end. You can sometimes drive yourself crazy striving to get a perfect drum sound that still doesn't sound right in the context of the tracks. So I would guess if it was Mike Stone or Roy Thomas Baker that engineered it, that they were that style of engineer where they worried more about getting it right in context than making it sound perfect on its own. So there you go. Where did I get the tracks? From somebody I know from the Quarantini Happy Hour that was very kind in giving it to me and asked me to never give it to anybody else, which I never will. So sorry I can't share it with anybody. They recorded the song, I don't know, let's find out. I know it was in the UK. Which recording studio was Bohemian Rhapsody done at?
Rockfield Studios. Here's a summary from the current.
Rockfield Studios. Rockfield Studios in Monmouth, Wales. The song was recorded over a period of 3 weeks. Freddie Mercury mentally prepared the song beforehand and directed the band throughout the session. It was done in 1975. Nothing else of tremendous interest. Who engineered Bohemian Rhapsody? Mike Stone. I was right about that. He started working with Queen in 1974. He started out at Trident Studios. Anyway, there you go. Little trivia for today. Sorry, I'm to anybody watching. I'm trying to catch up on the chat. Anyway, let me read some stuff that you guys were kind enough to put in the comment section after a show last week. Okay, this one's from Tony Salazzo. Remember we were talking about whether or not the Waves NX Ocean Way Nashville plug-in was a good idea to mix in headphones. It allegedly, and I'm pretty sure that it does it. To what extent? The reviews so far have been really good. So apparently, it takes your headphones and turns them into the sonic environment that you would have if you were working at Ocean Way Nashville in the control room, which is a great control room. I've actually been in there. And Tony Salazzo says, recording studio simulation for headphones. I have Abbey Road Studio 3 with the head tracker. It's a device that sits on top, clamps onto the crossband on your headphones, and it tracks your head. So when you turn your head to the right, it sounds like you've turned your head to the right in the control room. And I always found, frankly, I tended to favor my left ear. I definitely noticed that about myself, that if I were trying to refine a kick drum sound or any sound and I had something soloed, I would always tend to listen with my left ear, which generally indicates that your hearing is a little better in one ear, a little more definition in one ear than the other. Funny thing is, in my senior years here, I find that I was going to say my left ear is the less good of my two ears, but that's probably because I blew it out by turning it to the side all the time. Anyway, for me, the head tracker is pointless since I don't want to bob my head and get different left-right balance. And if I do want to hear more left-right, the software is a simple dial to change that. Regarding Ocean Way versus Abbey Road, for me, the difference is always pointless since what I want is to be able to do a mix on my headphones or my speakers and get a similar result, or put another way, I want consistency, so mixing on one won't substantially change the mix when listening on others. To that end, I have it set to simulate near-field monitors and EL8 headphones. However, the software is quite flexible in setting mid-far speakers, head size, and has a dozen headphone profiles. Having said all this, I rarely use it since my mixes can sound great in the studio, but horrible in the car or earbuds. I also have SonicWorks and have calibrated my speakers and headphones, and I mix in mono. The problem might be my ears, not my gears. P.S. I don't know about Logic, but the DAW I use, which is PreSonus, has an excellent separate listen bus, which means you cannot accidentally print the song with the simulators in the chain as you would if they were the last in the master bus. Yeah, I could imagine that would be problematic, that if you're listening in a simulated control room environment and that goes out on your master bus and you print it that way or bounce it that way, I guess is the technology or the terminology today, that would be a little embarrassing. Let's see, Tony also said, remember we were talking about mixing with intent. Mixing with intent, interesting idea, but sadly no, whilst I try to get mine into the same ballpark as the reference tracks most of the time. Well, there's an intent right there. I'd just like my mix to be clear and well-balanced and not to suck. Things like shimmer and layer of airiness are not things I specifically try to get, but I can if I spin the controls enough to get an interesting /right sound, then I'm pretty happy with myself. So, yeah, intent is different in every circumstance. If you're trying to get the same kind of overall balance and sound, like if I were mixing and hearing references in a taxi listing, and the references all had, like a really heavy bottom and really airy sounding synth pads, and it seemed like the reverb was probably a small room with like a 1 second decay on it, and the mix was kind of fat on the bottom and bright on the top. I would try and mimic those things because that's what the references sound like. So that would be intent. Also, just trying to get things to sound good, interesting, and right, then that's an intent. It's just, my whole point was that you should kind of know what your intent is when you start the mix. Otherwise, it's very easy to get sucked down into the rabbit hole of, I'm going to make the bass sound great. Now I'm going to make the kick sound great. Now I'm going to make the snare sound great. Now I'm going to make the acoustic guitar sound great. Now the banjo, now the piano. And you go track by track, making each thing sound great, but you lose the cohesiveness that you might have looked for if you thought about it for a minute before you started the mix. Because very oftentimes, I've said this before, and many of you have agreed, that if you worry more about all the components being wonderful sounding and you don't worry about the overall picture, it probably won't sound that good. You're working harder than you have to, and the result won't be as good. Sometimes, and I think Bohemian Rhapsody kind of showed me that today, you can kind of just shove up all the faders and it sounds 80% as good as the record. I mean, give or take, some of the balances are off. If I just shove them all to, the 0 point on the fader, yes, some of the balances are off, but the overall sonics sound kind of like the record. I don't have any EQ on it. I have no reverb on it, no delay on it, no compression on it, nothing. And it still sounds pretty good. Darren Fletcher says, tell the story about Celebration. Okay, we've all heard the Kool and the Gang. Sorry if I'm repeating this for the 10th time, but, I've got a request, and you know me. Put $1 in my tip jar and I will acquiesce to the request. I would say it was probably around 1979, 1980-ish, somewhere around there. I had a very close friend who was the chief engineer, head tech at, I can't remember the name of the studio, West Orange, New Jersey. House of something. Anyway, I knew the owners of the studio and their chief engineer, the head techie guy in charge of like repairing stuff and installing new equipment, all that stuff that engineers who sit behind consoles generally don't do, but it's absolutely necessary to make a top-notch studio run on a 24-hour-a-day situation. So he can't remember if he came to my studio in Florida or if he sent me. Anyway, I got a hold of a 24-track to 24-track copy of the song Celebration by Kool and the Gang. And I shoved up all the faders. I do that anytime I get a new multi-track. I just shove everything up in a straight line and just listen to what's there. And then I'll start going track by track to see if there's any stuff like on the Bohemian Rhapsody thing. At some point, I could hear a woman's voice. She's walking around the studio, like picking up an ashtray and talking to somebody in the middle of the tape. When you just shove the faders up, usually it sounds somewhat like the record. In the case of Celebration, when I did that, it sounded like the record. Then when I went track by track, I was like, oh my gosh, it literally sounded horrible. The drums sounded like, the snare drum sounded like you took a Kleenex box, put a piece of tinfoil on top of it with a rubber band, and then beat it with a Q-tip. I mean, it's just the worst sounding snare. The kick drum was really mediocre. The bass, not that good. Everything was just, there was like no fidelity, no finesse, none of that stuff that I learned at Criteria Studios was on there. And I knew the engineer that engineered it. He was a guy with a bunch of credits on big records. I had met him personally on a couple of occasions. I think on one occasion he was actually in my control room hanging out with me while I was mixing something. It was somebody that I respected. Certainly just looking at his credits, you had to respect him. But man, oh man, just track by track, it sounded like crap. But yeah, when you just shoved them up in a straight line and then went, okay, the bass isn't loud enough, bring that up a little bit, bring the rhythm guitar up a little bit, you could get it sounding pretty close to a record inside of 5 minutes. So I've never been able to personally use that approach. Some people use it very effectively. There you go. Anyway, this is why you don't want to EQ too much in solo. But the funny thing is, back in my day, because I learned at Criteria from some of the best engineers and producers in the world at the time, they were not afraid to make serious commitments about what they would commit to tape. So, like, Shirelli and I don't see eye to eye on this. Rob will record stuff. He'll get a good mic position or plug in a bass, into a direct box and just go with it. Maybe throw a little compression on it. But he rarely EQs going to tape, which is what I'm going to call it. Whereas I would just I don't care if something needed, 10 dB boost at 4.3K on a snare drum to make it sound great. I would do that in the record process and commit it to tape. And I would probably EQ it some more on the mix. So it's just different styles. But I always had... I recorded with intent and I mixed with intent. I always kind of had a plan. As I was getting a feel for the song or the band, I had a vision of where I was going to take it. So it wasn't like I just sat down and made the kick drum sound great. I made the kick drum on the record side of the process. I would make the kick drum sound great for that song, for that record, for that band. Oftentimes when you're doing an entire album, which we used to do back then, a group would book themselves into my studio for 2 months and we would do an entire album in 2 months. Well, we had the same sounding room, the same players, the same instruments, and you wanted the record to sound pretty cohesive from top to bottom, from the first note of the first track to the last note of the 10th song on the album. If they sounded wildly different, which sometimes records did back then, but not so much, it was almost unsettling. So that was kind of in the unspoken rule book of engineers at the time, was look for a cohesive approach. So while you might vary the sound of the kick and the bass and their relationship to each other if you were recording a ballad by that group, if you were doing a rock song the next day, you would go for, a kick drum sound that maybe had, 4 dB of boost at 2.5K. And if it were something that had a lot of eighth notes in the kick drum, maybe you would use a high-pass filter to get rid of that bottom end because the notes were happening in such rapid succession that you get this whoopy thing in there. And you were really after the attack, especially if the bass was doing boom, 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 boom with the kick drum. So all these things come into play when you decide on your sounds going to tape and also when you're mixing. So for me, that was my intent, it wasn't just making it sound like that's the best kick drum sound in the world. It was the best kick drum sound for that song. So there you go. Right, Paul House says, think it's right to record as best as possible, and then you edit in the mix, but reverb is always mix only because you can't remove it. Well, as I mentioned the other day with the Eagles master I got a hold of years ago, the 24-track or 16-track of Take It Easy, Glyn Johns clearly had some sort of reverb that printed to the multi-track on the drums. And the drums are just drums left and drums right. There's no kick snare, kick track or snare track. It's just a stereo pair with all the drums kind of pre-mixed down to that stereo pair. And unfortunately, the reverb that he's got on there is not that well balanced. So if you hit play and pan the drums far left and far right and sit there with your eyes shut and move the two faders or mouse the two faders. I can't wait to get a control surface. Until the kick drum appears to be dead center down the middle, the faders are not at the same level. And in doing so, to get the kick to be down the middle, which is where you definitely want it, the snare drum didn't sound like it was down the middle because there was a little bit more reverb on one side than the other. And it kind of pulled the snare drum off to that side, even though it wasn't so apparent on the kick drum. Because the snare has higher frequencies in it, it was more apparent in the reverb wash, I call it. And then there was an acoustic guitar track that was done with the rhythm track, and that's got the drums leaking into it. So what I did to solve that problem, if I remember correctly, was I had, let's say that the drums sounded a little roomier on the right side because of the reverb that got printed to tape. It's a very small amount, but it's on there. So that pulled the snare a little bit to the right. So the acoustic guitar that has the room leaking into it, because the acoustic guitar was cut when they did the rhythm track for the song, that's got the snare drum in it. So I panned that to the left and tried to, first of all, get the two acoustics to balance with each other, and then tried to balance out where the snare appeared to be, to get the snare down the middle by using the reverb that was printed to tape on the full right side of the drum kit, combined with the room sound of the acoustic guitar picking up the drums, pan to the left, and then using some EQ and compression on that acoustic guitar, not to make the acoustic guitar sound pretty, but to make the snare drum work better, if that makes sense. Anyway, those are the kinds of things that I learned when I was a kid growing up in the industry. An Irish banjo player walks into a bar. All right, anyway, let's read. The next thing is from Paul House. Let's see what Paul had to say. He said, I'd like to hear about what the industry is heading toward. Most common genres, longest running genres, most dependable genre, newest genre that seems to be getting requested. Finally, drones aside, what genre would you personally, meaning me, I guess, enjoy to write in? So let me address the first thing first, which is most common genres. Paul, are you talking about film and TV or records? Because there's probably a difference. And I got to be honest, it's if anybody could accurately predict that about where it's going, they would be like Clive Davis wealthy, I don't know that anybody can really do that. But one thing you can do, if you want to really see, I believe, what the future is going to be on radio and on pop radio and on pop playlists, that is to go to indie pop and indie rock playlists on Spotify and Pandora. Not the biggest ones, not the kind of, number one playlist that gets like a gazillion spins, but go to some of the stuff that is down, in the middle of the playlist hierarchy. Excuse me. And Paul says film, TV, yes. Okay, well, this is also true to some extent for film and TV. Look at the up-and-comers playlist. Those are the people that go out there and work hard to discover new stuff. And I believe that more often than not, that trends that we see as, part of the mainstream 2 or 3 years down the road start with those 21 to 25-year-olds that are just in love with music, and they will listen to any kind of crap they can to find the gems that are buried in the muck. There are a couple of music supervisors that I haven't followed in probably 3 or 4 years, but for a year or two I followed their playlists on Spotify. And they were definitely following some of these young guns that were going out and beating the street, trying to find these new acts. Sometimes I'd listen to stuff and go, really? Is it not like the Emperor's New Clothes a little bit? Are we so incredibly obsessed with, hey, I heard that before anybody else? The process of music discovery and laying claim to a hot new discovery. And sometimes the stuff that would make it onto the supervisor's list that started out with the young kids list was just like horrible. I mean, downright like would never make it past a taxi screener. Nobody in on the show today or in the chat room would listen to this stuff in your car or hanging out at home. You just wouldn't. Maybe other 21-year-olds at college dorm rooms smoking a bowl, with trying to come up with good reasons for skipping classes that day. Maybe they would listen to it. I don't know. I don't get it. Maybe I'm just too old. But some of the stuff it wasn't just obscure or left or right of center. It was just plain bad. It sounded like a piss poor demo. No songwriting chops, horrible vocals, instruments out of tune, no sense of recording skills whatsoever, no production skills. I try and find the charm in some things like that. I've actually heard stuff at Taxi where on all those levels you'd go, yeah, there's nothing above a 5 or a 6 on a scale of 10. The engineering, like a 3, the production, a 3, the songwriting, a 4.5, the vocal delivery, a 3. And just listen to stuff and shake your head. But sometimes it had a charm. Maybe it was the lyric was just such a fresh way of looking at something that other songwriters haven't looked at in a very long time. There were oftentimes something about it that was the redeeming quality. But there have been things that I've heard on these playlists where I just go, there is no redeeming quality. None. And yet music supervisors were drooling all over it. And sure enough, 2 or 3 years later down the road, I did hear other stuff that made it into the mainstream that was at least in the ballpark with that crap that I heard way earlier. So there is something to be said for that. Now, as far as film and TV goes, music for film and TV, trying to prognosticate what the trends are, follow the trends on Spotify and Pandora, because more often than not, I would say 75-80% of the time, the music that supervisors are looking for sounds like what you're hearing on the radio. And by radio, I mean Spotify, Pandora, and radio. Not necessarily top 40 radio, but stuff that makes it out into the mainstream, because that's what would be happening in real life if the show you're watching, if the scene from the show you're watching is supposed to be a representation of real life in today versus 1965 or 1921 or 1987. If it is contemporary and sounds like today, it's going to sound like the music of today. So that's the best indication you have. You could make a pretty strong argument that hip-hop arrived on the scene years ago. I'm talking 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. It arrived on the scene in a big way. It obviously arrived in the record industry years before that. But as far as film and TV go, hip-hop beats started making it into a lot of stuff. Sports television, instrumental cues for reality TV shows, lovey-dovey, super sexy ballads that would be in, a drama. Hip-hop arrived and is here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future, until something else that kind of changes the whole industry comes along. Let's see, what else? All I can tell you is follow Robin Frederick's advice. She, every day, looks at the Taxi listings, and anything that shows up in the references for any of the listings that she's not familiar with, she listens to. And she says that's her main music discovery tool. So, yeah, we do a lot of research to get those references in there. You might as well be the benefactor of it. So, there you go. That's the answer to that. I wish I had something that was like more revelatory where you go, oh, wow, that's like a real, I never would have thought of that, but it's kind of common sense. There was another question. Oh, okay. What genre would I personally enjoy to write? I don't know, Paul. Having just started playing around with Logic, I've always said that someday, I don't want to die in the saddle at 75, 80 years old with Taxi. I'd like to retire and enjoy life a little bit. And I probably will go back to recording and mixing some music at that point in time because that's what I love to do. Not that I don't love this, but I also love to do that. So I think about that, and I worry that I would bring my 1975 to 1985 ears to anything that I work on. So I hope to, between now and when that retirement day comes years down the road, make my ears more contemporary. I could, try and just mix a bunch of stuff that makes me happy from that time period that I know, or music that is at least similarly, like similar instrumentation, mostly organic, as opposed to like, sampled this and sampled that and electronic this and electronic that. That's not really who I am, is that computer-driven record guy. However, I really should just push myself and go, okay, why should I remain stuck in what I used to do and what I'm comfortable doing? Why shouldn't I push myself outside of my comfort zone? And, why don't I try and make records like Marshmello or somebody like that? It might be fun. I think it actually would be very challenging and very fun to learn a new skill. And now that I've got the tools to do that with, maybe that's the route that I'll take. Why go backwards in time? Here's a funny story, though. Last night, I got a text. I had a business partner in my studio in Fort Lauderdale, a Triad Recording, for 6 years, a guy named Doug Wyrick, who was like a brother to me. He passed away about almost 3 years ago now. Anyway, his ex-wife and he stayed very close, even though they were divorced for many years. They were probably still best friends. And so she and I keep in touch. We text back and forth, 4 or 5 times a day. Anyway, when I was going through my divorce back in 1985, I believe, I was staying at their house in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and commuting into New York City every day on Amtrak and New Jersey Transit. And they had a brand new baby daughter named Laura. And I remember there were a couple times the kid cried. They could never put her in a crib. And I said, why don't you guys go out to a movie? For the next 3 nights, you guys go out to dinner, go out to a movie. I will put, because I already had 2 young daughters under my wing, so to speak. I said, it's really hard as a parent to listen to your kid crying like somebody's shoving a hot poker in their eye. So you guys go out to a movie. I'm going to get your kid trained to sleep in her crib. And she was probably 6 months old at the time. So I made sure the kid her diaper was changed and made sure that she had a full tummy after drinking a bottle. I made sure that she spit up on my shoulder, put the kid in her room, turned on the little mobile and the nightlight, and walked out, shut the door, went downstairs to the family room and turned on the TV nice and loud. And I just let that kid cry. I mean, like scream her guts out till she exhausted herself, fell asleep. Night number 2, she only cried for about 10 minutes, fell asleep. Night number 3, only cried for a few minutes. Night number 4, put that kid in, rubbed her little head, said, good night, Laura, shut the door, and the kid was out like a light. So why am I telling you this? Because it has a connection to a studio. Laura is now grown up. So that was 1985. How many years ago was that? 36 years ago or something? So she's now a grown woman, has 2 young children of her own, and she is married to a famous engineer mixer guy named Dave Krause, who his biggest claim to fame, I think, is all the Shakira records and a bunch of other stuff. Anyway, Laura and Dave moved to, and I've not even met Laura as an adult. I've spoken to her when her dad was in the process of passing away. She and I spoke on the phone, and I'm family to them, although I don't know her as an adult. Anyway, she and Dave moved to Nashville some time ago, and they are in the process right now of trying to buy a recording studio. And the studio, which I can't remember the name of, has an MCI recording console just like the one that Doug and I had at Triad Recording, which I hope he's planning on replacing it, because it was functionally, it had great topography, easy to learn, easy to use. The preamps did not sound great. The EQ was reasonably okay, but not great. Bottom line was, Neves were thought to be kind of old, clunky British consoles that were underappreciated back then, funny enough. And SSLs really didn't start showing up probably until around, I want to say around 1979, 1980 was when they really kind of started making it into the mainstream, but they were unaffordable for a lot of people. So those MCI consoles, MCIs were the Chevrolet of recording consoles, okay? Neves were kind of like a Packard, a cool old thing, but most people didn't want to drive it when newer, slicker cars with seat belts and better brakes were out. And then SSLs came out, and those were like a Ferrari. And then people started really appreciating Neves for, I don't know how that happened or why that happened, but I'm glad it did happen. So the MCIs kind of got left in the dust. And you could buy, like, I had a 28 input MCI 500 series console that was probably about $250,000 back then, I think. You could probably pick one up used now on Reverb or something for, I don't know, like $30,000 or $10,000. Anyway, yeah. I've been seeing all the new consumer SSL stuff that's been coming out. It looks great. And, we all want to love it because it says SSL. And it probably does sound great. And it probably is made really well. But, try it before you buy it. Don't just assume because it's got a brand name on it that it's going to sound like an SSL, G-Series mix bus compressor or an E-Series channel strip. It may or it may not. It probably will, but be sure. Ooh, Pat Wara's got a 6 mixer. Those are sweet. An Avid S3, I don't have any experience whatsoever. Let's see what an MCI 5 series would go for these days. MCI 528 recording console price. Come on. Oh, there it is, my baby. I spent many years. Wow. You can buy it for $9,485. This is literally the exact console that I had. Oh, man, I'm going to get all choked up here looking at that thing. Wow, here's something that's held its... Are you guys familiar with that? That, my friends, was one of the 3 or 4 earliest digital reverbs. The thing stood about 2.5 feet tall, maybe 3 feet tall. It was made by EMT, the people that made the German plates, out of stainless steel and transducer and a pickup and hung on 4 springs. This was digital reverb. I think the first kind of famous digital reverb was Lexicon 224. I had one of those. And then at some point, the ENT folks sent me one of these. And I probably had that in my room for about 6 months to 9 months. And I've got to say, it was really dense, rich sounding reverb. We called it R2D2. If you look at it, that's kind of a top-down view. But like I said, it stood about waist high, and it had these levers on there, and we called it R2D2. It was an EMT 250. It was really good sounding reverb. Wow, you can buy a Harrison 32 series console for $8,500. That's what a lot of the earlier Michael Jackson records had. And here, that was exactly the console that I had at Triad Recording, the MCI 528 series. That's what I did that Melanie double live record on. See those little black faders? Bottom had white faders. Those were the mix faders, and when it was in mix mode. Then above the channel strip, above the strip where you put the tape that said kick drum, snare drum, all that stuff. Above that are the mute buttons, and then above that you see little white faders. So I used the little white faders, even though those weren't VCA controlled. I used those as my input levels. And then those little black faders up there, ooh, getting hard to see now. The little black faders, damn. Those little black faders, oh, shoot. Oh, come on, cooperate. The little, crap. The little black faders were sends 1 and 2 for reverb and other effects. So that was kind of clunky. In theory, it was good. You could have 2 faders, one for send 1, one for send 2, and you try and balance them out to get a good left and right balance. The problem was you'd reach for other stuff after spending 5 minutes balancing your snare send to the 2 live chambers that you worked for hours to get those to sound equal, both in tone and decay time. Then you would bump those 2 little faders, one of them when you were reaching up to like change a bus assign or change the EQ, and it would just blow the whole thing out of the water. So there you go. Yeah, that's a lot of knobs. Bigger than it looks on the phone. Yeah, I would say that console was probably about 8 feet wide, not including the producer's desk and the patch bay. It was a very functional console. Everything was very easy to find on it. Everything was where you wanted it to be. The only thing you had to kind of raise your butt out of the chair for was to lean up and change the bus assigns, like microphone, input number 4 going to track 23. See if there's anything close up that's worth showing. This is how we labeled tracks back in the day. See the little writing strip? We had this white tape that would slide into a thing, kind of like a rain gutter that was flat. Had little ridges on the side, so you'd slide the tape in there and write in, kick drum or drums left, drums right. And the funny thing was when you changed songs, you would change the strip. So we would keep all the strips either pinned with push pins or pieces of masking tape to the back of the rack room that was attached to my control room. So my assistant engineer, to be funny, he and somebody on one of the records, might have been my assistant Paul and Neil Young, decided to mess with my head. So I think I've worked on maybe, 12, 13, 14 songs with Neil. And Neil used to make fun of me because I could never remember song titles, as you guys mostly know. I'm bad with names, bad with song titles. And Neil would say, it's the 3rd song on the 2nd reel. Okay, great. So I would write everything meticulously on these paper tapes and make little notes on there like Neil, acoustic guitar left, drop D tuning or something. And you have to work really hard to write it that little, like a 10-point font as a little subtext underneath the big thing said guitar left or acoustic guitar left. So Neil would sometimes go back into that room where we had the rack room and there was a phone on the wall. He would go in there to make a phone call and he would shut the door so he wouldn't have to listen to what was coming out of speakers. While he was in there a couple of times, he changed things on the tapes. He would literally like take something that I just penciled in. Sometimes I'd write stuff in pencil knowing that I was going to eventually bounce it somewhere else. And rather than using whiteout on the tape, I would write it in pencil. Eventually, once it was etched in stone and we were getting ready to go to the mix, I would put it in Sharpie. So Neil would take my penciled in stuff and erase it very carefully and then write it in and try and mimic my handwriting elsewhere. And he would scare the crap out of me. He would take like lead vocal Neil. And my lead vocals were typically somewhere down in, it could have been in tracks 12 or 13 or down around 17, 18, depending what other stuff I had in front of it. And so he would move it to elsewhere, but not label it elsewhere, and then erase the track that it was on, erase the writing. So I'd put up the master and hit play and hear nothing. Go, where is it? Finally, I had the good sense to look up and see a meter moving elsewhere, from where it was labeled. It's just torture. Anyway, wow, it's 4:56. I can sure talk a lot about nothing. I don't miss doing track sheets, yeah. Yep, gaffer's tape and duct tape. The world, you can build anything with those. I haven't had my first Songs from a Headband. Just got his first vaccination shot. It is wing night tonight. That's right. Did I mention that? Yeah. I was thinking about doing them in the smoker, but I don't think I'm going to have time. Anyway, so my wife and I were supposed to be leaving for Israel to visit our daughters this coming Sunday on Valentine's Day. And she's got a leftover ticket on one airline, and I've got miles on another. So we were on two flights. We were going to take off at approximately the same time from LAX and land in Israel about the same time. Everything was etched in stone, and now they've got a lockdown going on where you can't even fly into Israel. Before, as you fly in, you get tested at the airport with a swab up your nose. Then you self-quarantine for 10 days, and if you're fine after 10 days, then you can go anywhere you want. But they're locked down. So that's no fun, and we can't even fly in. So we've decided to postpone that trip a couple months. Why am I talking about? Oh, so I didn't get the vaccination because I would have had to get the first one before we flew and would have been in the air or in Israel at the time for the second one. Now that we're going to be here, I just talked to my healthcare provider yesterday, and they haven't called me back today, oddly enough, but probably next Friday I'm getting the first shot. One of our friends got her first shot. She's about 55, and she and her husband own a dental practice. And the wife actually got hers on a Friday. That's why I'm scheduling mine Friday. She was in bed kind of sick, like achy, rundown, slight fever for all day Saturday and all day Sunday after she got her first shot. Her husband just felt a little crappy, but not enough to stay in bed. Yeah, writing does rub off on duct tape. Sean, you're pretty late, but that's okay. We don't take attendance. Oh, man. Yeah, they just started providing shots for 65-year-olds at my healthcare provider like this week. Before that, it was 75. California in particular, maybe other parts of the country, has done a really bad job. It's like the doses got here and then they weren't distributed very effectively, apparently. Oh, your brother just got over a mild case of the virus. I got to say, almost everybody I know and several people, it wasn't this way 2 months ago, but now it's like a flurry of our friends have had it, and they've all basically had it mildly. Like the worst case we heard of was my son-in-law's stepfather had a persistent cough, and my son-in-law's mother got it and felt kind of crappy for a couple of days, which seems to be what other people are saying. You said that I got a copy of Queen's multitrack. I did. I can't tell you where I got it. I got it from somebody who's not allowed to give it out, and I can't give it out, and I can't tell you where he got it. Or I'm sorry. I don't mean to be coy about it, but can't. Yeah, even the mild cases can cause heart damage. Tape editing, when I did it, we didn't use like regular Scotch tape. The tape was made by the brand Scotch, but it was specifically for editing. No, Monday, I was trying to get, if somebody's mentioning the CEO of Indie Bible, he cannot do it this Monday. I reached out to Michael Lloyd at like 7 a.m. this morning to see if he would want to do one of his listening and feedback sessions with us on Monday. I haven't heard back from him all day, which is unusual, because he and I were exchanging emails late yesterday, like at 9 o'clock last night. I know somebody on my staff also has the Queen multi-track, so I'm guessing that if you were to Google Queen multi-track digital file or something like that, you may be able to find it online. Okay, one final thought before I go, which is, did you guys hear the latest? Late last night as I got into bed, I turned on the TV, and the news was on, and I was getting ready because I don't like watching news that late at night because it'll keep you up way past bedtime. But there was actually somebody being interviewed from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control here in America, that's saying that now they've determined that a mask really isn't that effective in stopping the spread of COVID. We all know this. I'm looking for a mask, but we all know this, that if you're wearing a mask, even like the blue surgical one, almost any of them, we've tried them all. I've got N95s, we've got the surgical masks, we've got cloth masks, we've got bandanas, we've got something from everybody here. Anyway, with all of them, let's face it, maybe it's just because I got a schnoz on me, but if you exhale hard from your nose, you're going to feel a little puff of air hitting the bottom of your eyes. That means if air can escape, air can get in. So let's face it, the masks probably are doing more psychologically than they are medically. And the person from the CDC flat out admitted that last night. So now they're recommending that you wear 2 masks, which, we've heard them talking about recently, and now it's becoming a thing. They are also suggesting that you might want to take some pantyhose. I kid you not, folks. Take some pantyhose and put the pantyhose over your face. Don't get kinky on me. Put your pantyhose over your face to hold the mask down against your cheeks. I'm sorry. I'd rather have COVID than put pantyhose over my face. I mean, it's got to be a great time for bank robbers, right? With all these masks now. You walk into a bank with a mask on, nobody'd give you a second look. 11 months ago, you walk into a bank with a mask on, they'd hit the red button and shoot you. What's damaging your lungs? The masks? Yeah. Who knows who to believe or what to believe anymore? Pink panties with frills. I'm just not even going to touch that one, Pierre. Yeah, who knows? Who the hell knows anymore what is the right thing to do or to wear or whatever? It is getting strange. I think it's good to wash your hands. My wife is like, why are you worried about it? Because the grocery store, I'll keep wipies in the cart. And every time I grab a cantaloupe or a chicken or whatever, after I put it in the cart, I'll wipe my hands off. My wife rolls her eyes. But you know what? Somebody's got COVID. They may or may not know it. They're in the grocery store. They sneeze into their hand. They wipe their nose. They rub their eye. They pick their teeth. And then they reach for a cantaloupe and go, nope, this one's not ripe enough. And they put it back. Then they reach for another one, another one. Dr. Fauci doesn't know. I'm convinced that dude doesn't know much. He's changed his opinion on all this stuff. Why can't he just say, we don't know because this is all kind of new to us and we're figuring it out, rather than saying do this or don't do that? Give a caveat. So anyway, yeah, I fear somebody rubs their nose, then they put a cantaloupe or a baked potato or whatever back in the thing, and I pick it up later. I could get their germs in my hand. So yeah, I'm careful that way. Much more careful about that. I mean, I do wear a mask, but I don't believe that it does much, because I absolutely, if I'm wearing sunglasses, they get foggy when I'm wearing the mask. Clearly, air is leaking out up here. Maybe people that have a smaller proboscis than I do don't have to deal with that. Anyway, there you go. That's it. Show's over. We will send out an email this weekend letting you know what Monday is going to be, especially if Michael Lloyd is going to listen to music. We will let you guys know so that you know what the protocol is to submit your music for possible airplay and review by Michael Lloyd on the show Monday. If he doesn't do it, I just got apple. I've had apple cider gummies for the last 3 months. Don't get the goalie ones. They're way more expensive than they need to be. I found alternative ones, can't remember the brand of, but they're the exact same ingredients, the exact same percentages, the same amount of everything, and they were less than half the price as the goalie ones. So there you go. So if we don't have Michael Lloyd on the show Monday, I don't know, maybe we'll do Ask Michael Anything. Haven't done one of those in a very long time. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us today. Great to see you guys. Great hanging out. Don't put any pantyhose over your face, please. I actually asked my wife about an hour ago, honey, do you have a pair of pantyhose I could put on my head for the show? And she just looked at me and went, what? Yeah, I could try Stephen Baird. I keep meaning to call him. All right, you guys, take care. Be well. Talk to you soon. Adios.